But the origins of those regimes still had been in the working class movements. So these regimes had been plebeian. It is not true that the working class was the ruling class, but the ruling class, the ruling political elite, came from the working class. There was no rehabilitation of old aristocratic or bourgeois strata. The cultural inegalitarianism of classical bourgeois societies was unknown in these societies. Also, inequality was much more reduced. And also, social mobility was important. And there was, of course, affirmative action, positive discrimination in favor of the sons and daughters of the working class. Through education, there was a great social mobility in one direction, you know, from down to the top, and from the bottom to the top. That's one thing. Secondly, also the official culture, which was, of course, very important, of these regimes, had been inspired by the traditions of the working class movement. Rationalistic, very much based on science, and it was in its nature, it was philosophical, which was something totally lacking in Eastern Europe before these systems. So it was very much an enlightenment state, if you want an absolutist state, but distinctly an enlightened absolutism, informed by scientism, progressivism, and all that pretty old-fashioned, but nevertheless rationalistic and materialist culture, and the great respect for dissemination of culture, of high culture. And, you know, we always are, you know, astonished how well educated people had been in those regimes. You know, how many good books had been read, and how many good concerts had been heard, and how many good films had been made. Now, this gives a mix unknown anywhere else. So, what was really lacking? Real social deference, and a real lack of people being deferential and respectful towards authority. These systems tried always to imitate real participation and real sharing, and that left many traces. And you can't say that you know, all those pretty totalitarian marchings up and down and so on were aristocratic in nature, and so on. So there was this popular and plebeian side to those regimes, and their egalitarianism, and their scientism, and so on and so forth. That is something that has been a progress. You can't deny it. There's been a progress. So, you know, from feudal age peasants to regimented proletarians is still an advance. It's not enough, you know, we know how bad it could be, and it deteriorated very quickly. And then, of course, what shows the deep contradictions of these regimes, that they had to resort to the same maneuvers as any bourgeois state would, nationalism. Of course, that was always the simplest, and that shouldn't have happened in a real socialist state. That shows too that there was no real socialist state. You know, same thing. You know, all these countries went back to their Christian roots and their nationhoods and their ethnic identities and prides and so on and so forth. Now, and then of course consumerism and the rest of it. So this has to be taken into account, and this is what people are reacting to. And when people tell me the astonishing thing, they felt freer then. Of course, that's on the face of it is nonsense. They weren't of course freer. But what they mean is that authority wasn't visible. It wasn't visible. It was absorbed by the system. You know, you didn't see the Politburo members on their meetings talking nonsense and proving themselves to be incompetent, blundering idiots, which they were. Now we can read the secret protocols and can see that they were blundering idiots. But no, and there was the usual disadvantages of democratic politics conducted in public were lacking. People weren't aware of the fact that they had been led. There were, of course, exceptions, like in the case of Tito, who of course, loved to show that he was the leader. But this was not the rule, this was an exception. And most of these communist leaders had been grey, faceless bureaucrats whose power may have been resented, but certainly wasn't envied. They didn't look like, you know, enviable kings. I want to be a prince too when I grow up. But who wants to be Leonid Brezhnev when he grows up? That's absolutely not on. But you might want to be a marshal with a beautiful white uniform. But that was the exception. Also, it was a very dangerous thing for Tito to do. But anyway, so political domination was invisible.
We've all witnessed with the current crisis the revival of the ideas of socialism, Marxism. How would you comment on that, and especially concerning Hungary?
Well, there's not much of it in Hungary. It wouldn't be a very good example. But there is elsewhere, and there is, of course, especially in the West and in Western Europe, and also in some youth groups in some places in Poland. Even here, former Yugoslav countries, Russia, and of course Greece, which is the atypical East European country, because that was the only East European country that wasn't under Soviet rule of any kind. Now, but be that as it may, local differences and so on, but in a way it was unavoidable. Not only because the crisis had come and that people could see the disadvantages of the much vaunted liberal market regimes, but more importantly for the fate of the left, it was the vindication of the new left in a way, you see. So after all, the heterodox and heretical left had been fighting against Soviet-style systems for 60 years. But they, at the same time, were fighting capitalism for 60 years. They had been vindicated by history. So you can't say that, people like Trotskyites and anarcho-syndicalists and left communists weren't right in their criticisms and weren't admirable in their consequence of resisting both systems. And also they had a great intellectual achievement to their names. So, when after the very strange episode of '89, when it seemed that capitalism was everything, that the Archimedes point from which resistance could spring ceased to exist. There didn't seem to be any space from which. Of course, that seemed to be, that proved to have been an exception, and capitalism went back to its traditional character of being a society with contradictions, and among contradictions there is also conscious political resistance, and adversary culture and counterculture were always flourishing since capitalism exists. That was always anti-capitalist. Even the mainstream culture of capitalism is not pro-capitalist. It could be conservative, but then usually it's romantic anti-capitalist and so on and so forth. And modern philosophy is modern art, even if they are tragic, even if they are not militating for change, why should they? Certainly, they are not conformist. And they are not apologists for the regime. So that situation obtains again. And since, of course, the most comprehensive and most fruitful theory that opposes capitalism is Marxism, which is a huge body of doctrines and theories.